Let's see what else. Right, of course, I put in the drops. So we've got the pickups. We already had those last week, but I'll show you how that code works this week. The essence of it is when you shoot an enemy, you've got a 20% chance that that enemy will drop a chest. There are 3 colored chests, and each chest color corresponds to one of the 3 pickup items, which are all traps. The first trap is a mouse trap. The second one is a spike, and then the third one is a leaf, what's called a leaf storm by Reiner. It's Reiner's artwork. And I'll show you how each of these traps works in a moment. I'll demonstrate them so you can see the play value of each of these. Each of them has different strengths and values. In defense, they're all for defense, self-defense. Let's see. Last week we also had, but did not discuss the gems. The concept here is a very simple level progression concept. There are 4 gems per level. There's a HUD at the top indicating that you have currently not picked them up. It has a gray border. That means you did not get it. Let's go ahead and restart. And I'll pick one up so you can see it. Let's pick up the white one. So we picked up the white one, and our white HUD turned green. When we get all 4, it progresses to the next level. The way it does that is it simply redraws the level and increments the level counter and moves on. So I'll just demonstrate that very briefly. Let's go pick them up. And it places the gems randomly within the bordered region. So we got one more somewhere here. Here it is.
Drawing you to the edge of the forest. See it?
Sir?
Drawing you to the edge of the forest?
That's right. It's the way the algorithm was put together was that it tried to be as close to the edges as possible, but then it gave a little randomness to that, how close it was. So it's randomly placed, but with a preference to be near the edges. That way you have to run around and risk yourself a little bit. You have to be strategic, thoughtful. Okay, so let me just jump right into the code. We'll get through the boring bits. One of the things I promised in a previous week, and I did finally, is I have completely removed the need for SSK. I went through all of the code, and what you'll see checked in today, we'll still have this line in main where you could require main or require SSK if you wanted to, but it is no longer used within the code. I've kept it around purely because I like to use some of the debug features in SSK, and that way I can quickly enable it again and use those debug features. But as you'll see, it's commented out, and the game runs fine without it, which means that I replaced all of the functionality that was previously dependent upon SSK with regular Corona code, which you'll find in the project. Let's see. You'll see at the bottom here of main that the section for the sound has been enabled for this demo. I'll go ahead and commit it like this, but for the rest of this time while we're talking, I'm going to turn it off. But the essence of it is very simple. It requires a sound manager. It calls sound manager init, which within the code, what that does is it will preload all the sound effects for the zombie sounds and the arrow firing, get them all ready. And then I call enable SFX, which is the function to enable the sound effects. So if I did this, what would occur is it would still catch the events for playing sounds, but because I haven't initialized the sound effects engine or turned it on, it won't play any sounds. So it's basically a toggle, a very rudimentary toggle to turn on and off the sound effects. Similarly, it's a very simple soundtrack method. It's only got one soundtrack that it plays, if any, and the way you do it is you simply call sound manager, play soundtrack, and then you point it to an MP3 or an OGG or a WAV or whatever it is you want to play. And I chose just a random bit of music from Incompetech, which there is a link to in the code. And he's got royalty-free soundtracks that you can use in your games with credits. So that's the key. You must give credits if you're going to use any of his soundtracks. So, but for now, I'm going to turn this off. I'm going to turn that off in 2 lines, and now we have no sound. You probably couldn't hear it anyways, but I hear it over here. It's kind of annoying. So it's annoying for me to have sound and talk at the same time. So because then I've got multiple sounds coming in and out here. Another bit of just bookkeeping here. I'm going to go on to showing you how I made the forest quickly. I'm going to do the small bits first. But before I did that, one of the things that I decided to do was I realized as we progress through this game, let me play a little bit and pause it and show you what's going on here. Let's get a zombie out here. Come on, zombie. So kill the zombie. All right, let's do this. Oh, that was nuts. Why did I do that? Okay, good. Come here, zombie. Let's fire another arrow. Okay, so we got a lot of visual elements going on here. We've got the HUDs. We've got the indicators on the HUD. We've got the player. We've got the background. We've got the forest. We've got the gems. We've got our reticle, our arrow. We got the zombies, both walking and dead. What starts to happen here is when people first develop their games, typically what they do is they just throw everything into one display group. And then they run into this problem where certain things are rendering on top of other things, and they're getting rendering layering issues. So having been through this whole exercise before, I set us up with, and you can see it off to the left here, I set us up with a layering system. And the concept of this layering system is you have the current stage, which is the single group that Corona creates initially that everything else lives in. And then I created a series of groups, one called background, another one called world, underlay, one called content, another called overlay, and then interfaces. Now, you see more, and I'll get to them. And then what I did was I organized them in such a way that current stage was on the bottom, and if you proceeded through this graph, you could see that background was next, the world, then the world contained underlay, content, and overlay, and then finally interfaces. That was great. Up until last week, we had enough layers. They were organized in such a way that I could put certain content and certain layers and always get the rendering effect I wanted. But this time around, or last week, I started to do some additional stuff. I worked on the HUDs. I was adding the gems and I was adding, the chests and the traps, and I realized I needed a couple more layers. So what I wanted is I wanted the enemies, for example, you shoot them, and I wanted them to go into their disintegrate animation and then just sit there for a while. And they'll hang around on the screen for about, 60 seconds or so. And what I wanted was these piles of bodies everywhere, but I wanted them underneath all the other moving objects. So originally I was keeping them in the content layer, and then what was occurring was they would layer on top of gems, and it was starting to be a little bit chaotic. So what I did was I added a new layer called dead enemies, and when I kill an enemy, when I start running the animation for disintegrate, I will simply move it from content into the dead enemies layer, and that will push it down a little bit within the rendering stack, and then anything that comes along afterwards, or anything that was created in the content layer before that, will then be on top. So, for example, let's see if I can manage this. Let's find a zombie. Oh, zombie, would you please come? Where are you? Here we go. Here's one. Okay, let's see if I can shoot this guy at the right time. So I'm going to shoot him. Right now he's over the gem, and then, too late. It's hard to do, but I would encourage you to do this. Let the zombies walk over one of the gems and then shoot it, and you'll notice that when it finishes the disintegrate animation, the gem will be on top, whereas previously the zombie was sort of like walking over it. And that way you don't lose track of the gems and the chests. This is especially important for the chest drops, which we'll get to in a minute. On top of that, I created another layer called items, and the gems, the chests, and I believe the traps all go into items. And then content, which is where the player goes, is that's the player and the arrows go in content, and that way they're always on top of everything else, except for other moving NPCs, enemies. The enemies and the player, when they're moving, are in content, but when the enemies die, we move them down to dead enemies, and our layering is controlled in such a way that it's all nicely organized and not chaotic. It doesn't interfere with the game. So that was a little bit longer than I wanted, but the premise here is basically that when your rendering situation gets more complicated, you may find yourself needing to add more layers, and if you use the strategy which I've used here, it's very easy to create a rendering system where you can add more content layers and use them at any time.